Hello, everybody. So this review is on week 11, I think. Yeah, week 11, public policy. Um, I'm just going to go over, hopefully in 20 minutes or less, the some of the key concepts in the public policy section that we read. What some of the actors are and what sort of policy windows we're looking at that may open in the near future. Um, so hopefully some people get something out of these videos, or maybe even some people watch these videos other than my mom, who apparently has watched a few of them. So I'm going to try an experiment. If you watched this video, email me and write in the email that I mentioned that my mom watched some of these review videos, and I'll give you half a point of extra credit towards your final grade. It's not a lot necessarily of extra credit, but it's a little something, and all the little somethings add up, and to me it'll be a fun experiment. So, onward to public policy. What we're talking about when we look at public policy is the how and why of politics. You can open up a PowerPoint if you want to from online and follow along. We're looking at questions like which issues get attention and why. Why are some issues acted on? What does it mean when an idea is, if you heard the phrase time has come? Healthcare is an idea whose time has come. Gun control is an idea whose time has come. You'll often hear phrases like that from Obama. And what does that mean? How does that happen? How does an idea's time come? And then how does an idea's time end? And I think, as I kind of said, how and why are certain policy proposals enacted? How do we get the solutions that we get? Things like that. So, just some key concepts we have. This is all from John Kingdon in his book. It's a theory, a model of how public policy works. I personally happen to think it's a fairly good theory. You are free to think that it's a bad theory or not a correct theory. That's the way social science and politics works, is that we get to have discussions about different theories, and or as I said, theory is a model of the way the world works, and we think some are better than others. So, some concepts here. He talks about three streams that run independently of each other: a problem stream, a policy stream, and a political stream. He talks about windows. Windows are both problem windows. They open up because of some focusing event, generally some sort of focusing event around a problem, or there are political windows, windows that open up because of a radical change in sort of political mood or politics. And he also talks about how windows open both predictably and at random, and it is during these windows that legislation can move forward. He talks about entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are those that have pet problems or those who have pet solutions. They develop solutions. Wouldn't necessarily say they develop problems, but they identify problems and they try and push for their solutions and problems. They soften up the political process, as we'll talk about. They're the political sort of stream for their problem or solution to get attention when they have the opportunity to do so. There's the concept of coupling, where solutions and problems are, they're coupled together, sort of brought together, merged together during a policy or problem window. Opens so that legislation can be moved on a particular problem. There's governmental agendas and decision agendas that he talks about, and different levels of that. And we'll talk about a couple of case studies, what's going on. So, streams. There are 3 streams. They run independently of each other: political, problem, and policy. And they're both random and have individual processes that exist within them. So policy stream, for example, different policies can sort of pop up at random. People can have various ideas, and you can't exactly predict what ideas people will have. However, once you have those ideas, there's sort of predictable patterns that people go through in adopting or not adopting those policies, strengthening the policies or tossing the policies. And I can already tell this will be a little over 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. But anyway, just an example. So all the streams run separately from each other. At times, the streams will intersect with each other, but you need all 3 streams, policy, problem, and political stream, to intersect during a window before you can get any sort of legislative action. Otherwise, policy will just be talked about, problems will just be talked about, and the political process will sort of run its course. But there won't ever be any combination of those 3 elements of the public policy process that allow for solutions or legislation to be enacted. Let's see, what's this? Okay, so entrepreneurs and coupling, we'll just go through. I think the slide shows it's ordered on here. Entrepreneurs are both visible in a non-literal sense and visible participants. So invisible entrepreneurs are those that sort of do the real, on the policy side at least, and on the problem side I guess. Those invisible ones are the ones that do sort of like the real research and the real development of policies. They're the ones who are doing kind of the nitty-gritty, tedious tasks of figuring out, if we enacted this policy, exactly what effect will it have on different groups of people, what problem will it address, will it properly address a problem, things like that. They're giving sort of low-level talks to other policy experts. They're having lunches with policy experts and floating their ideas. Some of their ideas are being swatted down. Other of their ideas are being said, hey, you got a great idea here. And once a entrepreneur sort of develops and refines a pet policy, a policy they like, they spend a while, years, a decade, or perhaps even a little longer, kind of pushing that policy, not necessarily pushing it in the expectation that it'll get adopted and passed sort of immediately, but they do it to soften up the system, which we'll talk about, or I'll reiterate in the policy stream. They soften up the system to the idea so that when a problem or a political window opens, people are already aware of their policy solution, and the policy solution has legitimacy, and they can run with that policy solution and get it into the window really quickly, have it attached to whatever problem exists, and have people adopt it, and it goes on its way. Visible participants, both for policy and problems, are like, politicians, mainly. Some representatives, spokespeople of interest groups. The big one that most people, I think, know about, Juan Pierre, if I'm getting his name right. I'm getting his name really close to right. President. He's the president of the NRA. He talks a lot. My very quick Google search didn't bring him up immediately. That's so sad. Juan Pierre, I think is his name. Or Juan LaPierre. It's really not this important. I shouldn't be spending that much time on it. Anyway, those are visible participants. And what these participants do, visible and invisible, if they have a pet solution that they like, they watch the problem stream as it floats by, and they try and attach their solution to a problem. Any problem that they can feasibly attach their solution to. Now, there are people in the entrepreneurs in the problem stream that want their problems to get addressed and solved, and they're looking at the solution stream, the policy stream, also solution stream, sort of doing the same thing. So there's this negotiation between the two, even though they're both running independently of each other. Kingdon describes two types of agendas, a government agenda and a decision agenda. A government agenda is a list of issues that the government is spending, Capitol Hill, is spending a significant amount of time sort of paying attention to. Whereas a decision agenda is a step up from a government agenda. A decision agenda involves a window being open on a particular item or on a set of items, and legislation is possible / imminent to be passed on that issue, on that thing. So those things are on a decision agenda. A government agenda is just sort of whatever major things people are talking about. It's a way to distinguish between Congress holding hearings on various issues, even though there's no hope of anything being done on those issues, versus holding hearings and talking about issues that something actually could be done on them. Okay, so the problem stream. The first sort of fundamental thing to a problem stream is to understand that there are conditions in the world. Conditions exist. Conditions are basically the way the world is. So I think, as I said in class, it's a condition that I drive to work to teach y'all 30 minutes every morning and 30 minutes back, and I have to wake up at 6:30. It's a condition that people get the flu every flu season. Excuse me. It's a condition that sometimes the electricity goes out. These are conditions. Conditions are just like things about the way the world works. Conditions are what can be defined as problems. Or in other words, problems are conditions that have been defined as problems, if that makes sense. Conditions become problems generally from a couple ways. One, we find a condition that violates our basic values. Now, this can be a condition that has existed for a while, but as values change, that condition becomes a problem. Gay marriage, for example. That's been gay people cannot get married to other people the same sex. And that's been a condition that's existed for in America since the beginning of America. It's, however, become considered a problem only more recently because our values as a society has shifted to suggest that it's wrong that to prevent gay people from being able to marry the person they love. Also, conditions become problems when you compare those conditions with other units of the same condition. I use an international example in class. A domestic example, if Greensboro has an unemployment rate of 9% and Winston-Salem has an unemployment rate of 13%, those are conditions, but that condition becomes a problem in Winston-Salem because those cities are very close together. They're, I guess, fairly similar. The fact that Winston-Salem and that indicator on that condition is vastly different than Greensboro makes it a problem. Now, if both cities had a 9% unemployment rate, and if Charlotte had a 9% unemployment rate, and Raleigh had a 9% unemployment rate, and the whole nation had a 9% unemployment rate, that would be a condition, but perhaps not necessarily a problem, because the condition is equal across the country. And also, it wouldn't be a problem if it's sort of considered normal, if a 9% unemployment rate is normal. The flu is a great example. A certain number of people get the flu every year and they die from the flu every year. That's a condition. And while it's sad, it's not considered a problem because a fact of life is people get the flu and people die from the flu. There's nothing that we can really do to stop that. We can try and minimize it as much as possible, but you know, life involves hazards like disease, and disease, you can't stop disease completely in most cases. However, let's say next flu season, the number of people who get the flu increases by 10,000%, some extremely high number, or even if it like triples, and roughly the same percentage of extra people die from the flu. That condition all of a sudden becomes a super major problem that government's going to put a lot of attention towards trying to figure out what's going on and fix it, because that indicator, the condition, has changed. It's changed comparative to other relative statistics, historical statistics in this case, and it's sad. So, problems emerging, that would be a focusing event and also an indicator of how problems emerge, and often windows open during these emerging problems. The other way a problem emerges is through feedback of a program, and feedback in this case literally means people reporting on how a program is operating. So if I'm running Medicare, and I give feedback that all of a sudden, like, Medicare isn't meeting goals, or it never did meet certain goals that it was set up to, boom, problem exists, window opens up. Let's see if something gets done to solve it. I talked a little bit about the policy stream already. So the policy stream begins kind of, or at least ideas in the policy stream begin in this primeval soup where people are just sort of bouncing new ideas off of each other, suggesting sometimes wild and crazy things that immediately people are like, really, you just suggested that? That's dumb. And then the policy goes away. Sometimes, though, policies shoot up from that primeval soup, and people go, hey, you got an idea there. And then the person that suggested the idea is like, cool. And then they start talking about that idea. First, maybe informally over lunch. They get feedback, and then the policy sort of develops, gets refined, and then people start talking about it. And entrepreneurs who take the policy soften up the system so that the policy's ready to go, is generally considered legitimate and acceptable when a window opens up. Now, the policy stream operates with a certain set of processes in addition to the sort of chaoticness of it. all policies, in order for them to be adopted, they need a certain number of things to be there before people will accept them and sort of start trying to develop them. One, a policy needs to be technically feasible. This in a lot of ways can literally mean technologically feasible. If I develop a policy suggesting that we should build the Starship Enterprise and warp to Alpha Centauri and find a planet, hopefully, and terraform it and start a colony of humans, that policy is not going to go any farther than me just saying it on this YouTube video, because it's not technically feasible in the slightest right now. There's also the issues of values. If I outline a policy that the way we can solve our healthcare cost is by killing off everybody's grandmother, certainly would reduce healthcare costs, right? But it would be problematic to our fundamental values as a society. So that would not work. Since everybody's really budget conscious, they also need to make sure the policies have some sort of fair budget constraints or budget considerations in them. I can propose a policy to spend $15 trillion providing every single fish in the ocean with its own personal safety cage to prevent it from shark attacks. But that probably would not be feasible budget-wise or value-wise. Or the final way, public and political receptivity. Nobody, or I imagine very few people, there might be 5 people, who would be okay with spending a lot of money on protecting fish from sharks by putting cages around the fish and letting them swim in the ocean with the cages. So the policy that you propose has to be politically feasible. Side note to the healthcare debate, as I believe I've mentioned, a majority of Americans support at the very least, a single-payer universal healthcare system. Possibly even close to majority support a nationalized healthcare system similar to like what England has. However, while that idea has public receptivity, public's willing to accept that, it is not in any way remotely acceptable to politicians. Republicans are way opposed to the idea, and moderate Democrats in red states especially would never accept that idea. So even though it's a system an idea, a policy that the majority of Americans support, it has no political feasibility at all, which is why it never got discussed. So softening up being vital. We talked about the window that opened in '81 after Reagan got elected. There was this perception, at the very least, a perception of a decidedly conservative shift in the national mood in the electorate, and both Democrats and Republicans responded to that conservative shift during the window that opened, by passing more conservative budget and tax policies. Now, those budget and tax policies are policies that were being proposed, talked about, debated, written about in academic journals and stuff for at least 15 years beforehand. The Chicago School of Economics at the University of Chicago is a very conservative economic academic department, produced some of the most free market-y, laissez-faire, capitalist, conservative economists of the past 50 years. Milton Friedman is the head honcho, or considered the head honcho of that school, of that mode of thought. And he and a few other people have won Nobel Prizes in economics for their sort of models and research and ideas. Winning a Nobel Nobel Prize in any subject doesn't necessarily mean that you're right. After all, Paul Krugman also won the Nobel Prize for economics, and his ideas and the Chicago School of Economics ideas are the opposite in a lot of ways, not like complete opposites, but very much opposed to each other. But, prizes give you legitimacy, and it means that you got something there. So they softened up the political process when, or the policy process when the political window opened. They had their free market, conservative, budget cutting, tax reducing policy ready to go, and were able to get it pushed through quickly. The political stream is a little bit about what I've discussed already. It's just sort of the national mood, the mood of the electorate. If politicians feel like the public is moving more liberal or more conservative, the political stream can be affected by elections. That's a big way that they're affected. If there's a radical shift in the representation in an election, that opens up a window for all number of things to be proposed and possibly acted on. In political streams, you also have interest groups. Interest groups, it's important to realize, though, and this is probably important for your public policy paper, are more useful in providing support for or blocking legislation. They don't necessarily they're not necessarily effective in getting an issue on the agenda. So Sierra Club or the NRA, they're both not necessarily effective, or aren't really going to be able to force whatever they care about onto the decision or even the governmental agenda by themselves. They need somebody else to pay attention to them in one of the different streams, or they need some problem to come up that gets people to pay attention to them. And they're more effective in either blocking or providing support for legislation. Like the NRA was very, very effective in blocking any additional gun control legislation after Sandy Hook. So about windows, political and policy windows open up. Policy entrepreneurs and problem entrepreneurs have to be ready with their problems or their policies the minute the window opens, and to try and push that through, because windows are often temporary, they're short-lived, and they close. And if you're not sitting around with your support behind you, ready to pounce upon an open window with your solution in hand that has legitimacy, you will not be able to get that proposal pushed through before the window closes. That's why that many years and decades long process from entrepreneurs to soften up the system to their proposals, to get public support, to rally interest groups to their causes, and to sort of have people ready to spring up at a moment's notice to support their issue. Why that process is so important, because if a window opens up for gun control legislation and I have an idea that I just thought up, there's no way I'm going to get my gun control legislation passed, because nobody knows about it. Even if I make everybody aware of it before the window closes, it hasn't gone through any sort of vetting process. The system hasn't been softened up to accept that idea. It's just not going to happen. Now, windows can open in ways that specifically favor one side or another. And, for example, in 2008, a massive policy window opened up for the Democrats and President Obama. You had this kind of amazing, perfect storm of events where Democrats won huge majorities in the House and the Senate. We had a Democratic president. We had 8 years of a Republican president that by the end of his term was deeply unpopular, had a lot of scandals along the way that had hurt him and the party, had the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, which by the end of his term were becoming very, very unpopular. People were just getting fed up with the Republicans, and they were ready for some change. And so Obama and the Democrats swept into office in 2008, winning for a brief period of time, a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate, winning 80-seat or so majority in the House of Representatives. They had the presidency. They had the financial crisis, which was important because it seemed to show how the economic policies of the Bush administration had failed and had produced this crisis. To be fair, a side note here, it's not really entirely Bush's fault. His policy certainly didn't help, but if you want to look at the beginning of the problems of the economic policy that we looked at, you got to first sort of look towards the beginning of Reagan and then look at the policies of Clinton and Alan Greenspan, especially Clinton in 1998, 1999. He was involved in the process that repealed a law that would have prevented the economic catastrophe we had in 2008, which, by the way, even Obama has not proposed reinstating that law that would have prevented it. He's proposed way more moderate conservative ideas than what had existed, and that law had existed since the Great Depression anyway. So gigantic policy window opens up in 2008. What do Republicans do? Because it's not their time to pass policies. They're not going to get anything passed. It's Democrats' time. So when that happens, the opponents of the reform that the window opens up to allow, Republicans in this case, they oppose things. Their policy, their desire is to quote-unquote weather the storm. Policy windows will close. When all windows will close. What the opponents of change need to do is muck up the system, cause delays, frustration, debate, anger, all those things as much as possible to delay the implementation of any sort of law until that window closes. That's part of the weathering the storm. So, I talk about Republicans because they're the most recent example of this, but that's just the way it works for everybody. When it really looks like policies that favor or that another party supports that your party does not support, or policies that you would disagree with will get passed, you're going to, or what generally happens is, if you're in a political position to do this, is to try and cause as much obstruction as possible to weather the storm, to delay the implementation of any sort of policy until the window closes. Once the window closes, you're safe. Everything's fine. In 2008, Republicans did a great job for much of the policy window that was open of weathering the storm. There were a number of things that Obama was able to get passed during the first month of his presidency. But he didn't even get generally we think about presidents having 100 days where they have a mandate, they can get past just about anything they want to. They get their nominees appointed. It's this honeymoon period. He did not even get 100 days. He got a month at most before the Republicans were able to start that bunkering down process and weathering the storm. And that's part of the reason why healthcare reform took so long, had so much anger and vitriol behind the debate around it, and why that was sort of the last thing that happened in the Obama administration ever. It's not entirely true, but the Obama administration kind of ended in 2010 because there hasn't really been much of a window since then, and Republicans have been very good at weathering the storm of the Obama administration. The 2014 elections are coming up. Elections are a time when windows open. However, Obama will still be president after the 2014 election. Republicans will still be in control of the House. Democrats may be in control of the Senate. The Republicans may win control of the Senate. It doesn't really matter if Republicans win control of the Senate, because if they do, the Democrats will just filibuster everything the Republicans propose. And like I said, Obama will still be president. There will be no policy window unless something drastic happens between now and then, which could always happen. And that's why everybody is talking about the 2006 presidential election and not the 2014 midterm election, because 2016, did I say 2006? The 2016 presidential election is the next time where we foresee the possibility of a policy window opening up, where some legislation, some new ideas may be able to be introduced into the system. We'll have to see how that goes. So, I hope you enjoyed that 37 minute and 53 second review of public policy. Email me about how my mom sometimes watches these videos and get a half point extra credit. And I'm going to do the court cases now. So, peace out.